Thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm sure there'll be hopefully a few more people coming in, but they'll close the door I think at 5, so we'll get started. Great, so I am Lisa Umberger. I am the CEO of Secura and former NSA, supported them for a little over 12 years, so focused a lot on DoD cybersecurity policy, and led security engineering teams both in classified and unclassified environments. I'm really excited today to introduce our panelists that we have. Maureen Allison, former CISO, Johnson & Johnson, former FBI special agent, as well as a graduate of West Point, graduating with the first co-ed class of West Point.
And
so.
what year?
Oh, you really want people to know? 1980.
1980, so congrats on that, awesome. And then we have Ryan Heritage with us. I wrote down all of this because I want to make sure I get it right. So a long distinguished military career, Deputy Director of Future Operations for U.S. Cyber Command, followed by Commanding General of Marine Corps Forces Cyber Command, Marine Corps Forces Space Command, Marine Corps Information Command, and most recently retired after serving as the Director of Operations for U.S. Cyber Command. I got it? Okay. Great, awesome. All right, so today we're excited to talk to everybody about security management, security control management, and how that relates to IT security, compliance, how it impacts compliance, security, and infrastructure. So when I supported the NSA, there was some obvious complexity between security and compliance and how that related to IT engineering and infrastructure. So let's see, security control management. So we're focused on building secure and compliant infrastructure. And we're going to talk today about that and what that means to essentially be secure by design from the start when it comes to platforms and infrastructure. So Maureen, let's start with you. So you manage security at a very large multinational organization. Can you talk a little bit about what the security environment looked like there, in particular, like how complex the environment was that you worked for at Johnson & Johnson?
Well, not just Johnson & Johnson, but any large multinational company is very complex. You know, IT wasn't built in a day, and there was no architect that sat down and said, hey, let me build this really securely, and here's what the network will look, and this is how my data will look on there. It was built over the course of decades with data that went everywhere on all sorts of systems with all sorts of third parties who had connections. I mean, when we went from the mainframe days, like the mainframe days were the great days, right? It was all there, it was all downstairs, it was all, I had Rack F, everything was cool. And then they came out with the dang computers. The desktop computer was in the laptop, right? Used to be, I did somebody's performance appraisal. I'd take a file folder home at night, and a few years later, then they said, here, you can take the entire company's people's data home with you at night and lose it. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute, this isn't right. Because it's the way systems were built. Right? And a lot of times the decisions on what the security of the data looked like or the security of the systems looked like went to either the project team to put the thing together, or sometimes the business would make a decision on how it would look. And in those early days, we had stuff literally everywhere and little or no security. So when you ask that, what did it look at like J&J? My job has always come in as a fixer. All right, and to look at what we have and bring it together. And you know, my security architect and I described when I first got to J&J, we have this big, huge barrel of fish. And no matter what we stick our hand in and pull out, we are going to have a mess. So let's just clean it up. And so that's really is bringing in that secure by design and the either privacy or, well, we didn't have Gramm-Leach-Bliley, but HIPAA or whatever it was, SOX, whatever those requirements were, start there first, and then bring it up to the next level, which we'll call true security.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So when we're talking about secure by design infrastructure, you mentioned privacy and some of the compliance standards that you mentioned. Standards and frameworks seem to be changing all the time. We're in a place now where there's a big focus on compliance frameworks, especially when it comes to doing continuous compliance and continuous security. So Ryan, what can we do? How can we take advantage of kind of the momentum right now and the focus that's happening when it comes to continuous compliance, really to make sure that we can field capabilities faster, as well as really staying competitive on the world stage?
So first, thanks for the question. I do want to add a little context and background so folks in the audience understand my perspective when I'm answering these questions and what I've experienced. So I spent the first 25 plus years of my life as an infantry officer. So studying, exercising, executing, maneuver warfare. When I finished up as a colonel, I was leading, thousands of Marines and sailors in different environments and preparing them to deploy into different domains. So it's only been the last 10 plus years that I found myself in the cyber domain, in the space domain, and working in the information environment. But I will tell you that first 25 years has really shaped how I've applied myself and how I have sort of tasked or gone about looking at the challenges that you described. And so for me, I talk about how do I fight the network. So for me, the network is a platform. It is a place from which I project power. It's a place which I must defend. It is a place from which we maneuver, and is a place which I must guard data as a coin of the realm, as it is informing decision advantage. And so how do I secure that? How do I enable the joint force to be able to shoot, what we used to call shoot, move, and communicate? And so if we don't get the compliance and the security of the infrastructure right by design, by default, and continuously assessing that infrastructure, then I can't do those things that I was tasked with in my former life. And when I look at secure by design, that's firmware, hardware, software, but that's also people, and that's the infrastructure. There's also a physical security piece of that. And so how do we do that? And then, in terms of a dynamic domain, how would I do that for units that don't exist today, but tomorrow you're standing up and deploying a unit into the field halfway across the world and having to rely on that infrastructure that could have been sitting in a quad-con in a box for 6 months because you didn't need it at the time, it wasn't taking its updates, and then you got to get it online. And so how do you do that at speed, at scale, understanding that we are not going to grow any more people, so we have to leverage that innovation, those processes, to allow the Marines, sailors, joint force to do what they're supposed to.
How have you, in the last 10 years working in cyber, how has the threat landscape really evolved, in your opinion?
I used to tell folks when I was at the Marine Corps component to Cyber Command, so ran the Marine Corps networks, I used to tell that key leaders who would visit, VIPs who would visit, I see things changing every 6 to 9 months. You can come back and you can see our operational tempo has more than doubled. You can see the environment has changed. Where we were focused before, we're focused somewhere differently. By the time I left as a director of operations at U.S. Cyber Command, I can tell you the threat environment was changing daily, whether that's from a physical perspective, the adversary's perspective, or even our own capabilities. And so it's changing. China remains, I'll call that pacing threat, the pacing challenge, the scale, the scope, the will, the intent. So how do you keep pace? More importantly, how do you stay ahead of that? The same as we're all seeing from this conference, and a number of panels I've jumped in, is the cybercrime is growing. And so how are we adapting our abilities, our capabilities? I still give the nod right now to the attacker. I think they have the advantage. They have a different risk calculus than us. They only need to be successful once. And so how do you adapt? How does the environment adapt as we move forward?
Maureen, I want to give you a chance also over your career. I'm sure you've seen a lot of evolution when it comes to the threat landscape as well. So I wanted to give you a chance to respond as well to that question.
Yeah, when I was in the military, it really was, there was a military against a foreign enemy. And when cyber became a thing, it changed how we have to look at it. The threat then could come against a corporation. We had never seen that before. And I used to, with my team, it was, the bear is coming after us, and that we need to be ahead of someone else so that the bear doesn't get us. When I first got to Johnson & Johnson, we actually had to run to get ahead of the bear. We were so far behind. And I use the bear as a metaphor. You could use Russia or China. And I had the luxury of having to fight China when the government didn't have to fight China because they were trying to steal data from us. And we were doing intel operations. The way I knew it was China and not a Russian script kiddie just trying to monetize was that the data would disappear, but it would never hit the internet or the dark web. That was my threat indicator of who my adversary was and what we were going against. And I always looked at it, from the beginning, and I would tell my board this, is that, we have 4-grade adversaries. There's nation state, and I always loved it when I said, well, we don't really have to worry about nation state right now. And then we have a criminal element who's trying to monetize the data. They're trying to get at our data so they could sell it. And then we have what I call the crazy hacktivists, and we had Anonymous that was trying to come after us at Johnson & Johnson, and we could follow their activities pretty good. And then the big one, which some are benign and some aren't, are insider threat. And so to watch that over the years, where it was really, I'm worried about insiders, and most of the insiders I was worried about were the IT people, okay? The person who can provide the most access into your network without you knowing it is an IT person in a hurry. That's got to move data around or got to connect some networks, because as soon as that's done, they've created a hole that they may never close until somebody who's hacked you lets you know it's closed. And so as it moved over the course of my career, I could see that, okay, we're worried about these different elements till we got to when we were creating the vaccine, when it was all out hell on all 4 quadrants. It was just, oh my goodness, where are we gonna go? And so that threat changed dramatically. The other part was, okay, I can handle you if you're a hacktivist or you're an insider threat. I got stuff I can do. The criminal element, especially when it was actually with a nation state, caused pause, but we still could get our handles on that. There's some really good technologies like Rubric and stuff that'll get you for, help you with ransomware. But what really did me in, the moment in your career when you go, oh crap, I am the target of Russia, Syria, China, is a moment in time when you know that you cannot do offensive operations and you can only do defense, and you have no one to go talk to, that you've got this problem. I watched the Syrians take down our entire Drupal platform. Now, I had told those IT folks that that thing was a little outdated and they might want to upgrade, and they didn't want to listen to me. When the Syrians took them down in 22 hours and had it down for 7 days, and we brought it back up, and then they brought it back down, guess what? We replatformed really quickly. And so it's watching that evolution of these technologies over time. And as I said, when you're a corporate person and you go, oh crap, I need like a 105 howitzer to go after these people, and you don't have one, you know that you're in a different playing field.
Can I riff off of that
yeah.
just a little bit? So you bring a great point. When you talk about the environment, the lines are blurring between adversaries and actors as technology continues to improve, the ability to obfuscate not only your we call TTPs, your techniques, tactics, and procedures, but your intent, right? And so I've heard it throughout here, living off the land a couple of times. And so, again, that environment is becoming more dynamic and perhaps a little bit or more blurry. And, you know, you asked about processes and policies. They have to either anticipate or they've got to catch up. And so you having the policies and processes in place that allows, you know, from my last life, it allows us to then enact, operate effectively, look, as opposed to trying to pull doctrine and policy with us, you know, trying to get folks to get ahead of the requirements.
Yeah, so policy and procedures and processes, Maureen, you've dealt with probably quite a few new companies. So let's say companies that are being introduced through, whether it be mergers or acquisitions, or even just different divisions of the same corporation, right? So there's all different kinds of technology, all different kinds of policies and procedures that may be spread out throughout an organization or that you're introducing to your organization. Can you talk a little bit about that and you know, the risk that that introduces and how you typically dealt with those types of things?
Acquisitions and divestitures make you the largest target on the planet. It was known that the Chinese were going after oil and gas exploration in Africa and beating out the contracts because they had the information already. I was in healthcare, and so we could see it activity. And I don't know, and we all know, you know, that we're going to do an acquisition of a company, and we don't want the CISO to know too much yet because we're not telling people yet. And then you get this blob of crap that gets attached to your company that doesn't have any of the security controls, and they become the biggest hole that you have. So you try to throttle it down coming through a firewall, and all you get is grief. And if you don't go in with an ability to look at a company, I mean, we had a company that we acquired, and so you ask questions like, do you have two-factor authentication? They said, yeah, we have it. Come to find out, they had a 2-digit password. A 2-digit password, and their Office 365 domain was managed by an outside IT guy using social security numbers for billing. OMG, right? And so that's what I would tell you, is that you look and, you know, but we don't want you involved, CISO, because you'll slow us down. And at the same time, there's intellectual property, there's physical property, there's products that are all impacted when you do this. And so using my nicest voice, talking about how to get in there and look at that. And oh my God, if I just had a tool that would help me, it would have been great, because most of us were doing it like, here's the 800-page thing of all the checklist items that we have to check, and how much can we move over, versus hitting a button, running software, and going, oh crap, these are the major areas. Let's work on identity and access management first, people, because they don't have the passwords they need, or they're using the wrong items.
Yeah. So I want to focus a minute on the government sector, if we can. So authorization, are really moving things to production, being able to sign off in a lot of cases, and of course this happens in the corporate world as well, but at some point you have to accept risk, a certain amount of risk, right, to put things out into production. So I really wanted to talk about we talked a little bit about technology, but can you talk about your experience with how important processes are, particularly relationship building between the folks that are all kind of responsible for getting these things out there? So I'm thinking, you know, the IT security team or the infrastructure team, but I'm also thinking, you know, how are they interacting and communicating with the security team, right? And how are they reacting and communicating with system owners and mission drivers? So just curious, your experience with kind of the importance of technology, but also the importance of relationships and processes.
Can I answer a merger and acquisition one and then come
You
back
can,
in? Okay,
absolutely.
so
I will
mergers
let
and
you-
acquisitions, how does that apply to sort of Department of War? Think about all the allies and partners that each of the geographic combatant commanders will train with, exercise with, and if necessary, go to war with. And so all those partners, how do you bring all their networks into your network for the command and control piece, the maneuver, all the things necessary for them. So that merger and acquisition, while not within Department of War, there is an aspect. And so when you talk about security control management and how does that apply, and identity and access management, yeah, for partners as well. So quite the challenge. To your question on even in my time on the Marine Corps, is the authority to operate, the authority to connect did not reside within the same organization or the same people, and so authority to connect usually rested with me as, I'll call it, the operator, the one responsible for securing, operating, defending the networks. The authority to operate more rested with a higher headquarters, and so making sure that communication. And do you think that went smoothly all the time? Of course not. There were challenges. Processes were in place. And then the third element of that is the unit or the organization that we're supporting, right? So there was, what's the risk to the network? What's the risk to the mission, the operation, speed? And perhaps more importantly is, and this should sound, I know to this audience is really fundamental, is being able to see your network. And so in the acquisition process too, right? So you would have an operating unit could go to, I'll call them we call them our SysCom, our systems command, to acquire something that they wanted to put on the network. And a lot of times I wouldn't realize it got put on the network until a sensor went off and said, hey, you're denied from getting on the network. And then, well, what unit is that? And then we'd have to sort of do the forensics behind that. And so how do you do that at scale and at speed? And so getting those processes in place, the policy in place. And if we can remove some of that and make it more automated again, because I'll go back and just imagine what a network will look like in Department of War in a time of conflict with another nation state. Constant changes requirements. So being able to do that at speed will be critical.
Very good, yes. You mentioned fundamentals. For those in this room, you probably also know, besides knowing and being able to see your network, a basic cyber hygiene, right? Fundamentals, getting back to basics. Maureen, how do you, as a CISO, convince, let's say, the people that pull the purse strings or the board to spend money or to focus on something like basic cyber hygiene when you have everything is AI and this new, shiny threat coming. How do you get them to understand the importance of basic cyber hygiene?
One of the things is I just related back to risk. So, and it's not cyber risk or security risk, because businesses don't really care. What they do care about is business risk. What's the impact to my business if it goes down? Are we doing business in the Ukraine and I have to pull the network because Russia's playing around for years? Yes, I do. How much does that cost? And that's a hard place to go for sometimes with cyber folks because we don't have access to that data. I was security, but I worked in an audit department, and I learned that everything in business is about finance. No matter what else they say, it is about the financials and viability of the company. And I don't care if they're doing healthcare or ocean exploration or whatever, it is what that mission is. And it's the same with the military. It's a different mission, but there is a mission at the end of the day. And what is the risk to it? And once you can identify it, it's kind of like your queen, right? Because I can go in and say, hey, your manufacturing plant is located in Israel, and it's running, I don't know, Windows 2003. And oh, by the way, it's a $5 billion business. And if if Israel gets attacked, then there might be a problem with the cyber in that region. You may want to do something. And when you can bring in those numbers, people start moving around. And then it's a tabletop exercise, right? Learn that in the military. Just do a tabletop exercise. Show them what it's going to cost them. Guarantee you, all the way up the chain of command, everybody wants to support it. Now, I don't go in and say, hey, I want, so after NotPetya, what would it cost a large multinational pharmaceutical company to repair everything that needed to be repaired? We came up with an estimate of, with two pizza box meeting, $550 million. I said, well, we're not getting that this week, so let's ask for 10%. We got 65 million. And then we started fixing things. But if you think your network, the visibility is hard, wait till you get down to where they're manufacturing things and warehouses. But you know what? We made sutures. It's made out of cat gut that is stretched. And then it goes to an SAP environment after they've made the sutures. Well, guess what? I didn't have to spend a lot of money on the main processing part, and then only when it got into the finance areas of the SAP for shipping and receiving, and you have to know the business to be able to understand what the risk is. So I wasn't going to tell them that they had to, have 4-factor authentication for pulling catgut for sutures. But on the other side, J&J made 80% of the sutures used in the world. So better make sure the shipping and receiving in the SAP environment was secure for that. And so that's really knowing, where are you going to spend your dollar and what's going to be the most effective so that you can stay in business to make the money to support the company.
And how do you, what metrics as C-level, leaders, what metrics of success were you using when you're talking to the board or when you're talking to, a commanding officer? What kind of metrics do they care about from a business standpoint or a mission standpoint for you to be able to go in and kind of justify, what you're doing and to show that you're moving the needle in the right direction?
So my CEO, he probably put it the best way. I've never had an executive in the corporation that whole job was to not have anything happen that was so valuable to the company. And what I mean by that, it wasn't that stuff didn't happen, but we had set up a whole protocol of at what level and things needing to get fixed. And then it wasn't like, oh, you didn't do something, so you're going to get reported to the board. There was a whole process of how that worked. And because you work through that process, do tabletop exercise, hey, if somebody after a year didn't want to fix something, I'm good. I'm like, I'm going to the board if you'd like to come with me. That is fine. If not, I can talk about it very eloquently about why your business is vulnerable. I never had a problem, no matter how difficult it was, to get things supported. But you know what? I never cried wolf. Never cried wolf. And sometimes that was a little stressful because I would have liked to cry a little wolf and get a little more. But knowing that just-in-time delivery, the Russians going into the Ukraine, and 2 weeks prior to them going in, they came after Johnson & Johnson with 17 times network strength. We had just put our DDoS protection in. It was only tests in, and I'll give credit to Homeland Security. In August, they came out and said that they were seeing activity with Russians going after networks in healthcare. And it was then that it was like, where's our program for this over on our infrastructure side? And we started pushing. They put it in and monitor in December. And then when we started seeing the other companies go down, getting attacked, we turned it on. We turned it on 2 areas. It was the 2 that they went after. But a lot of that is, no, it's by calculation of where is the important stuff going through, and it was our 2 main data centers, one in Belgium and one in New Jersey. The only impact was that the internet went down for an hour, 17 times strength by the Russians 2 weeks before they went into the Ukraine. And that's when you go as a CISO, like, holy crap, what the, where's my howitzer? I need to really bring some big firepower out here, because this is dangerous. But upstairs, their success was nothing happened. They saw the 1 hour, but once they heard what it could have done to the network, but all this was taken care of, whole different ball of wax.
Yeah. I always have heard, right, that if you don't hear from them, then you know you're doing a good job, right? When it comes to
unless you're
security
hiding
to an
stuff,
extent.
but yeah,
well,
you do have to
we
be
don't recommend that.
transparent.
For sure, for sure. So, getting back to you, Ryan, what have you seen over the last 10 years, and even now, just looking at the cyber landscape, trying to really think about, like, what is really at stake when we have these attacks and there is downtime? So Maureen just mentioned, something was down for an hour. Yes, it could have been a lot worse, but when we're talking, whether it be within the federal space, the military, or even some of these large corporations or critical infrastructure, when there are these attacks, what really is at stake with downtime or disruptions if there are security or compliance failures?
Yeah, so I'll address it a couple ways. And I said this in an interview earlier, is not alarmist, just a realist. And I don't know who I stole that from, but based on, the threat is real. The threat is growing. If for no other reason, based on the technology that's becoming available, it will open that space for threat actors, whomever they may be. And so, the disruptions likely can have an amplified effect, can be more scalable, can also be more targeted. So whether I look at the example of Colonial Pipeline and the shutdown there, if you think about the reporting on Volt and Salt Typhoon, the pre-staging in the telecom and U.S. critical infrastructure. My former boss was on 60 Minutes and talked about a little town in Massachusetts and the water treatment facility. So why there? But if you can imagine, that town is not resourced for the cyber threat or cyber disruption. What does that impact, right? A Colonial Pipeline on the East Coast. Imagine a Colonial Pipeline event on the East Coast and the West Coast simultaneously. A disruption, a disruption in the financial networks. Just a blip. I think I'll go back to what Senator Rounds was quoted as saying, a blip on the financial. So there's not only the physical and operational impacts that can happen, there's also the cognitive impacts. What does that do on the psyche of the individuals? And then, we're just talking about cybersecurity disruption, cyberspace operations. Now, weave in through that information operations or psychological operations or influence operations, right? You bring all that together, the impact is then magnified wherever it may be. And so how do we invest in that? I think it starts, one, you have to have a strategy. So what is our strategy? Then you have to develop, one, hopefully resourced, but then those partnerships. And that's where I think, this type of conference is bringing that private-public integration. It's highlighting it. It's really driving it home. The third leg of that stool in the partnership, I think, has to be academia. So how are we partnering with universities, high schools, colleges, with the private sector, with the government at the federal, state, and local level to be able to scale our cybersecurity, to be able to mitigate those threats that you highlighted?
All right, so we're running short on time, so I want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. So I am going to ask, though, so this is a kind of a trick question here, because if you had a magic wand, we'll do the magic wand time, and you could wave your wand and manifest kind of one solution when it comes to security and compliance that's really going to make you think the biggest impact as far as making things easier, whether that be easier to implement, easier, to be able to report on. What would you change? I know that's pretty broad, but
No, I think we're actually getting there. And I'm going to use your phrase, secure by design. Okay, we're talking out in the hallway. Does anybody remember the old modem days when you had to figure out how, right, and how to connect? And better yet, when you went to a hotel and you're trying to figure out how to get into your company's VPN. Remember that? Like, you had to have a manual to figure out all the passwords and everything you did. Today, we don't do that, right? Because it's easier and it's more secure to get in. But what if there was a world where everything is built with security in mind, not bolted on afterwards, and we had networks that were secure? Because we're not even going to talk about what vulnerabilities we could find probably in some of the big networks. Why not, right? If you're spending all that money on advertising, why don't you spend some money on security to make sure that it is secure by design? And so I think in the future, that's where we will go to. But it'll only be tools like Sakura that help us get there because we have the visibility. But what if we don't even need, 15 years from now, because it's already there?
Yeah, that would be great. Ryan, how about you?
So I would say a capability that acknowledges we will not pay ourselves, we won't be able to finance our way out of tech debt, out of all the legacy infrastructure that's out there, and being able to pull that data that we still need, pulling that forward and securing it. And anything that I think can accelerate the zero trust effort across the board, I think that foundationally would really reset the playing field for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I wanted to have time for audience members, questions. So does anybody have any questions for our panel? I can bring you the mic. Question, okay. Yes.
I'll make it easy for you. I'll stand right here. So one of the things that you'd faced in your military careers is dealing with an adversary where you had the opportunity for offensive response. And of course, we stood up offensive cyber operations, but that's limited to very specific things under Title 10, Title 15, things that we can do. But for a lot of us, we don't have access to that. So what do you see the future being? Do we have to just sit there and play rope-a-dope and allow these foreign attackers to just have at us, or are we going to be able to somehow take a chunk out of them and do so under the laws that we have within our existing systems? And then how is that going to help out private infrastructure?
It's a really good question, and I am firmly on the, there are people who will have far more intelligence in the offensive area, but what we need, and I think Ryan had talked a little bit about it, we need the laws and policies of the United States to change to be able so that the full arm of the government can go after those that are attacking us. A long time, for many, many years, I used to complain because why isn't the government doing anything? Why isn't the government doing anything? Well, they didn't, I'm the intel. I'm the one who saw it. And once I gave that information, and you know how scary it is when you're going oh crap, I'm gonna be doing a vaccine here, and I'm the tip of the spear. I'm the tip of the spear, and where do I go? Luckily, Operation Warp Speed was set up, and a component of it was security. So I spent once a week informing a two-star general about the activities that we had seen and what was going on. I would have hoped that I would have gotten a lot more information coming my way, but he got a lot of information going his way. But that's the reality of it. That gap closes. Right? If there was a way that could be pumped in. Now, some of it is in there, but we're relying on 0 days. I had the Quampers virus. I'm patient 0. Okay, I think there's another patient 0, but I've never met them yet. And that's what we were dealing with in the Ukraine, is because we were covered, then all of a sudden I show up with Quampers virus. I call in the FBI, and they have never seen it. Okay, and then I get notice that it may be calling back to some government entities. I said, oh, that's cool. And that was 1 year to the day before NotPetya. And I had put in place a policy that no untrusted software from a third-party government could be put on the SCCM. It is the only thing that protected me that day. The only thing, a draconian, old-fashioned policy. And so what I say is that we need to close that gap so that that intel, that we're really working and having that ability. Problem with Homeland Security is, oh yeah, they're the homeland. This is the Ukraine. Like, who am I calling, right? And that is where we really need to what I call close the intel gap and get that pumped in. And even when you look at some of the ACDC and the Homeland Security stuff with the NSA, that is all, it's kind of favors the DIB, defense industrial-based companies. Well, I'm a healthcare company, I'm not a DIB. But for $50,000, I could join the DIB ISAC. But I'm not going to get entree to the JCDC. Why not? Why do I need to have a chair in a room? Why can't we have the conversation and the indicators of compromise, the information we're seeing, why can't that be pumped in? So I think there is a whole lot we can do, and good practices can be pumped in, especially with AI, to look at where things are crawling around and what they're doing so that we have offensive fighters who can do their job, because with a $110 million budget, I did not want $170 million so I could have offensive fighters so they could bring down my network in 5 minutes. They can do it. And so I would prefer to give it to the professionals.
So I would start with so Intel obviously is the foundation from which we operated in almost exclusively. And so being able to share that information, which then obviously then becomes intelligence at some point across the board. Again, I'll go back to the 3 legs of the stool: academia, private industry, and then obviously the government at multiple levels. Being able to share that information at speed, at time of relevance. I heard the last brief, you have less than 24 hours to act from a ransomware attack, or based on percentages, chances are you're gonna be out of luck. So sharing that intelligence. The next one is technology. So to your point, there's only so many limited teams, and so how do we scale those operations? That's something that I think is absolutely essential. Again, private, public partnership in order to, and then changes in policies that allow for the acquisition and to bring on that capability faster, allowing us to scale. And the other part is, what was not mentioned is I'm part of a cyber commission. I'm a commissioner on the effort to look at standing up a cyber surface. So much like the Space Force standing up a cyber service, that is really looking at 2 things. One, acknowledging our ability or necessity to scale on the offensive side, but also removing some of those man, train, equip responsibilities from a combatant commander and allowing him to or her to focus on the adversary and employing that force. So thanks.
Oh, time for one more.
You mentioned a couple of times about having academia, private sector, and public sector working together. I'm seeing that a lot of our adversaries, they're kind of focused on their nation. Okay, even though many of our allies are focused on their nation first. But our academia, for instance, they're multinational. Much of the revenues come from outside. Same thing with our multinational companies. So how confident are we that they're going to actually have national interests at heart Because, and I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying, this is the reality. And how do we deal with that?
I think that's an interesting question, and I think you would see these partnerships are already in place, right, all over the states. In terms of the percentage of time they focus outward, I'm talking. I am focused on defense of the homeland, right? That's what I'm focused on, America, and then our partners and allies with us. So. I think there are pockets, you might have pockets like that exist where there is some question, but I would tend to believe, based on my own experience, that we're just not pressing hard enough on those relationships to codify them and then scale them. We had, I think in my command alone, separate from Cyber Command, I think we had 10 or 11 different partnerships, agreements with universities and colleges, and whether that's an exchange of interns or if sometimes they have classified spaces that we could share and work in, that would be fantastic. On the industrial side, is where you're seeing this administration break down regulations and speed up acquisition. That's the nod to the innovation that's happening in the private sector. How do we bring that on quicker? Assuming a little bit more risk is what I've heard, right? And just and allowing us to, again, accelerate and catch up. So to your point, I think there will be some areas that probably a little bit more resistant. And maybe that's where we go back and you focus on the community aspect of it, right? At the local level. If you can grow it at the local level, then how do you expand it to the state and then perhaps across the country? And we're seeing more and more authority requirements being pushed to the state. And so how do they do that? And then how do you connect them, right? That's the end state, I think, the goal.
So Ryan, I'm going to add one more group to your group with your academia, and I think it's the venture capital and what we do in the United States. It is not seen anywhere in the world, okay? And some of the best and brightest will come to the United States for education, and they don't leave. I don't want them to leave because they're going to bring their knowledge and expertise into venture capital companies. And you see it all over the United States. You can go to Israel and you can see, yeah, they got a nice little incubator. Everybody's an intel officer, and they all came out of their own army clique. But the reality is, you don't see it anywhere but the United States with the private equity. And I know as a CISO, private equity was almost a little bit of a dirty word for me. And I stayed away from it because there were some security people that probably had their fingers a little too far in the cookie jar. And that's part of the reason after I retired is like I'm out in venture capital because I love what these small companies are doing and how do we incubate them and bring them up to solve the problems that we need in our security environment. And I think there's a lot of intersection with academia and the VC world and what we're seeing. So very proud of it. The other one is if you haven't been to any of the military academies and seen the cyber institutes that they're created there, I mean, the edifice at my alma mater, West Point, is just absolutely amazing in what they're bringing in there. The Air Force Academy is the same. Naval Academy, well, we'll bring you along, but yeah, no. But when you see it, it is absolutely amazing. So when I graduated from West Point, there was nothing called called computer science. It was electrical engineering. And I was in the first class to actually have a major in electrical engineering. And so if in my lifetime we have gone from that to this, can you imagine what these students are going to have at their fingertips? Knowledge and expertise and understanding. And so I think that is
the speed at which I could anchor here for a while, right? This is the speed at which they produce, right? So think about how long it would take to train somebody smart on artificial intelligence and then get them deployed in the Department of Defense, as opposed to if I could just reach into industry or academia and bring them in. And you're seeing more and more of that integration happen because it's an acknowledgement on how fast you can change. And You know, we used to call, when you're developing a course or something, you look at, or a new unit, doctrine, organization, training, material, policy, leadership, and facilities. That process could take years. You don't have years. You have what's the next threat, what's the next capability, and who's smart to train on it and actually employ it. And oh, by the way, I need 5 of them, like yesterday.
Right, or who has solved it already.
Absolutely,
Give me the technology.
absolutely, yep,
So we're going to get the Oscar music playing here in a second to cut us off because I think we're running over. So I did want to invite people to continue the conversation. We have a meet and greet happening directly after this meeting in the Sonora B hospitality suite, which is right across from the Veracruz exhibit hall, so just right out here. And you can continue the conversation with Maureen and with Ryan, so we'd love to have you guys there to keep talking. Thank you guys so much for joining.